So first of all then, what is the difference between drafting, editing and proofreading? Because they're three separate but interrelated processes. So first of all, drafting. This is the process of writing your assignment. It's often what we think about when we think about writing essays. It's that first stage where you're getting all your ideas down into some kind of coherent structure. And you may end up with several versions of your work as you rework it through the process. Each of these is a draft. So then moving on to editing. And editing is something that you do once you have a draft. It's actively improving your writing in terms of both form and content. So you're going back to your writing and you're thinking about your ideas, the arguments that you've used, whether what you've written is logical, thinking about improving your style, thinking about whether what you've written is clear, and really thinking about the overall flow of the essay. So it's going back and it's thinking about the bigger aspects of the content of what you've written in your draft. Then proofreading is the final stage after the drafting and the editing. And that's really just going back and thinking about catching small errors and inconsistencies in what you've been writing. So some of the things you might think about when you go back over your work for proofreading are spelling, grammar, whether you've repeated yourself, if there are any typos, and really just making sure that you're consistent throughout in terms of your referencing style, your abbreviations that you use, that kind of thing. So if we think about these three separate things in terms of the process, you start off with drafting your essay, you then move on to editing, and this is the biggest part of what you should be doing. And once you've edited, you then go back and you redraft, and then you go back and edit again. And once you've been through that process several times, you then move on, and proofreading then is what happens at the end. So one of the questions we often get asked is, do I need to edit my work? And the answer to that is a quite resounding yes. Yes, you do. So really when you're going back and you're editing your work, you need to think about several things, and these things might not be something that you've necessarily considered when you're in the process of writing that first draft. But you need to make sure that you've answered the question, and it's worth going back to the question and thinking about whether you really answered it or whether you've just answered what you think you should be saying. You need to go back and make sure that you've addressed the question in the introduction to your essay so that it's clear where you're going with the essay and what it is that you're going to cover. You need to go back and make sure that you've fulfilled the assignment criteria, and it's worth just looking at this again and just checking that you have actually done everything that you're supposed to have done. You need to think about whether you've drifted away from the main point at any time, and if you have, if there's a good reason for doing that. Sometimes it's easy to get attached to things that you've spent a lot of time on, but really you just need to go back and just make sure that you've only included things that are relevant, and sometimes you have to be a bit harsh and remove things, even though you spent time on them, because they're not relevant to your argument. You need to go back and make sure that each paragraph just focuses on one point and you've not crammed too many ideas into too small a space. Then you need to think about whether you've provided enough evidence to back up each of those points within the paragraph. And you need to think about the overall structure. So you've got a series of ideas expressed each in one paragraph. You need to make sure that the links between them are clear. And once you've been through that process, you can then move on to proofreading at the end. And this is really about thinking about the errors that you tend to make. And you'll know yourself if there's something you particularly struggle with, if there's something that you need to go back over. So you should really try and read through the essay several times and try and focus on a different issue each time. So for instance, you might go back and check the spelling, your grammar, making sure that your references are consistent, that if you've use numbers in a certain way, that you use them that way throughout, whether you've written them out or whether you've written them as numerals, and whether you capitalise things consistently throughout your work. You also need to go back and check for acronyms and just make sure that you've made it clear, if it's not already clear, what they stand for, and that you've used them consistently throughout. And it's worth just checking through the formatting at the end. Sometimes you don't realise things look slightly different, and it's just worth going back and just